Wow, what a privilege to have you here today. We thank you. And thank you especially to our donors and dear friends that are with us today. There's nothing more important that they could have asked me to speak on than today to share some things that hopefully connect our donors with our students. Because today we want to honor both of you. Approximately 93% of our undergrad students receive an average of $14,000 in financial aid each year. So hopefully, donors, you understand that you're a very integral part of making sitting here possible for all of these students. Now, for the students that were with us here on Tuesday, Professor Rogers unknowingly set the stage on the message of managing wealth, a message on stewardship. So consider that the first half of our message today. Yes, it is important that we understand that God is the owner of all, and only through God's provision are we allowed to share with others as we go through life. So this is a stewardship message, but a message through example, living example, that we get to see today. Now let me take a brief and say, today we miss some of those that have gone before us, for there are some that were with us last year that are not with us today because God has called them home. But they also left a legacy that their giving continues to provide for you students, for that was their heart. My grandson taught me a lesson several years ago about stewardship. He came home one day and he knows that Grandpa keeps a jar by the door, and I drop my change in every day when I come home. And it's a big jar. And I used to think I would fill it up someday, but thanks to my grandkids, I don't think it will ever fill up. But he came to me one day and said, "Grandpa, I need your help." And I said, "What you need?" And he said, "I need your pennies out of your jar." And I said, "Well, that's great, and you know you can have them, but why do you need my pennies?" And he said, "Because we're doing pigs for pastors." Now, I thought, this sounds like a great project. And I said, "Well, why would you do pigs for pastors?" And he said, "Well, this missionary came and spoke to us in chapel at school and challenged us to raise a certain amount of money for these pastors that they give pigs to." And I said, "Well, why do they give pigs to them?" He said, "Well, if they give them a pig, then they can help others. So it's kind of like if you give them a pork chop, they can only eat for a day, but if you give them the pig, they can eat for life and provide for the rest of their village." Now, I'm thinking as a grandpa who wants his grandson to learn about stewardship, I'm thinking, wow, I really appreciate this missionary and the school that my grandson's in at Ben Lippin that's teaching him these principles. So he cleans out the pennies out of my jar and takes off. He comes back a couple of days later and he says, "Grandpa, we didn't get enough pennies. We need some more." Now he's turned into a good fundraiser, hasn't he, Mr. President? So he gets some more pennies. The next day he comes back and says, "Grandpa, I need some more pennies." And I said, "Well, why would you need more pennies?" He said, "Well, my class got enough, but my sister, her class didn't get enough, and I need to help her now that they can raise their money." See, he learned this great lesson in stewardship about sharing and giving to others, but about planting for those who were unreached. I've had the privilege for many years now to meet people and families that provide funds for your scholarships. And you're going to hear some names today that you probably have seen on some of your scholarships. As I was thinking about this, I thought, what's the story here? Because see, everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. As a student, you have a story as to how you got here. As a donor, you have a story as to how you got here. But then I thought of the great passage in Scripture in Hebrews 11, the great examples of faith. Because, see, that's really the story that every one of you have shown to me. Throughout Hebrews 11, it says, by faith, by faith, by faith. And that's what I have been able to observe. And then it says they had confidence in what God was going to do in the future. Students, do you understand that that's what a donor believes? When they provide funds for your scholarship, they have confidence in your future and the future that God has before you and is going to provide for you. Several years ago, a donor wrote, "At this time, I'm leaving all of my money and possessions to your college. My son graduated from your college. He was happy there and he learned the Bible very well. I want lives changed all over the world for the sake of Jesus. And your college sends missionaries and puts them around the world so that can happen." My wife and I recently had the privilege to be with this lady in her final days. She was so ready and eager to see her Jesus because of her health problems. But she constantly said, "I want to be sure that I leave enough to help," as she called you, "those kids at the Bible college." See, I soon learned from many of her neighbors and friends, she told everybody about that. They would say, "What's going to happen to everything you have when you die?" And she would say, "I'm leaving it to the Bible college in Columbia, South Carolina. Those kids trained to carry the gospel around the world." And I continue to find that there are people that she communicated that message. Now I understand why she would often write or call me and say, "Can you send me some more brochures? I'm handing them out." Her lawn service man said to me, she wouldn't let me mow her yard but once a month. I asked her why we couldn't mow it more often so it would look better, and she said, "Because I have to save that money for those kids at the Bible college." See, she had a commitment to helping carry the gospel throughout the world. Several years ago, a career missionary walked in the advancement office and said, "I want to leave a gift for CIU." Later, he told us his story. He had served with a mission agency for a number of years in many countries. And as he had observed CIU grads everywhere that he had been. And he had determined that grads from here were most effective on the field, and he had been impressed. But now life had taken a turn for him. He had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, given less than 6 months to live. He said, "I want to leave everything here so more will be trained to go in my place." You see, we have several that have established scholarship funds out of tragedy in life. Listen how one mother described her desire. "Life has its valleys as well as its mountaintops. Realistically, there's pleasure and there's pain. Jesus told us there would be sorrow in this life. In our deep sorrow because of our son's death, we have searched for meaning to be found, not lost. We want to share one aspect. Not long after our son's death, we had a desire to do something whereby he would be continually remembered and God would be glorified. This has not been decided hastily. Rather, there have been times of prayer to search and know the mind of God. He has not failed us. In fact, he made it evident and confirmed the very steps we were to take. We have established an endowment fund at Columbia Bible College, October 26, 1988. Each year, some eligible student will be awarded assistance from this perpetual endowment. We are overwhelmed with expectancy as we stand on tiptoe to see doors open for students whose faith will be increased as they step out in obedience to God and grants assistance through this endowment fund. Later, they sent a similar letter to family and friends and asked them to join in contributing to this fund. My visits with them were always with mixed emotions because I always felt like I brought up in their memory the loss of their son. But always what they wanted to talk about, how are the students? Tell us about the students. And then she would bring out her stack of thank you notes from the students because she saved them all and read them over and over to pray for the students that their funds were helping. She always loved those thank you notes. I then had the honor of preaching both of their funerals, where they had asked that the gospel be shared and that their heart for the students be told. Yes, they gave out of pain, but they found great reward in what God led them to through that pain. A scholarship has been coming from a business for over 20 years. They have provided for over 175 students from 55 countries around the world who now serve as pastors, chaplains, missionaries, Christian school teachers, many professions. In the early days of their beginning to give, this couple would come to graduation and sit in the back to watch their students receive their diplomas. When business was slow, they would still send, for they always wanted to provide. Their son told me once that in their business, he thought they needed a new truck for their delivery, and he told his dad, maybe we shouldn't give this year, and we can buy that new truck. And Dad said, no, that's not the way it works. We give so the students can go. God will provide the truck. And the son observed God providing the new truck for the business that year. A retired missionary of 40 years on the field serving God, to everyone's surprise, because she had lived a very frugal life, left for a scholarship fund of over $1 million. Then there's the family that I affectionately refer to as Burgers to Millions. For see, this family got in the burger business, selling burgers. They came to a summer Bible conference that we were holding in Asheville, North Carolina in those days, and came to know us and came to know our students and started sending small amounts for scholarships. Those small amounts continued to grow as the burgers continued to multiply. More burgers, more students. Today, the father of this family, because he's retired from the burger business, not only continues to donate to the scholarships, but he recruits students. He says, I'll find some new students, and if they need more money, we'll give more money. His burgers have turned into millions. We always look for God's plan, and it's always interesting to hear how God brings the donor into connection with CIU. And I could tell you many, many of those stories, but here's one. My first knowledge of CIU happened when, as a teenage high schooler attending Youth for Christ meetings in Miami, Florida, where I grew up, I learned of Columbia Bible College. The YFC leader promoted a summertime bus trip for about 30 of us, and we came to a campus visit at CBC. As a result, some 10 or 12 of my high school classmates enrolled at Columbia Bible College. I think most graduated, and many have had real impact as Christian educators in the Miami area. Even my former pastor, Tommy Watson, was a CBC grad. So I gained awareness and respect for the early in life for CBC. Then about 15 years ago, Doug Rutt, and some of you know of the Rutts family, Doug is on our board now, revived that awareness. He responded to my request for advice about our giving plans by suggesting that we should have only 3 Christian organizations that we focus on. And of course, one of those was Christian Family Chapel, our church. The second should be CIU, and Doug said, well, you can pick the third. Did Doug learn this at CIU? All my experiences with CIU has caused me to have increased appreciation. Your commitment to the Lord to train and prepare young people to live and communicate the love and life of Jesus. So interesting to see one for over a long period of time, over 25 years from his first exposure to his beginning of giving, and now a very generous giver to the scholarship funds. Then God brought along the lady with cookies. Sweet lady started bringing cookies to the students down on the old campus in the neighborhood. Then to her cookies, she started adding gifts to the students, which she continued throughout her lifetime. In late years, she would have a family member drive her out here to campus and drive her around and let her pray for the students. So then her son continued giving, but started to increase. Then her grandson became involved, a story of its own. Today, CIU is greatly blessed by this family, providing many scholarships that only started with cookies. Listen to one of our grads tell their story of impact from this family. As an alumni of CIU, I received your September communication from the school informing me of the chapel service to honor both of you. Now, this is a letter that he was writing to the couple, the son of the grandmother who had started the cookies. He says, as I read the article, a wave of special memories concerning your mother swept through my mind. I want to share a few of those. I entered the graduate school in the early 80s and with only enough money to get through the first half of the year, but motivated with a deep desire to be used of God among the unreached of the world and a solid conviction that God had led me to Columbia. I soon found a little Presbyterian church on the south side of town and poured my energy into it, trying to put into practice what I was learning in the seminary. That church, of course, was Rose Hill Presbyterian Church, as you know. One Sunday when I was leading the children's sermon, someone noticed that when I lifted my toes upward, the soles of my shoes stayed on the floor. My clothes were no better off than my deteriorating shoes, and later that week, the pastor called me into his study. He informed me that someone in the church wanted to buy me a new suit, a new pair of shoes to go with it. And you know, of course, I later found out that was your mother. About a year and a half later, I was leading the church youth group and was helping the pastor with his assistant during that summer months. That summer, he called me into his office again. This time, he wanted to bring me to your parents' home. We went together and sat with your mother. I remember it well. She told me that for several days in a row, she was being awakened at night, seeing my face. She looked at me with her calm demeanor and clear eyes and said that she felt that the Lord was leading her to pay for my tuition and fees. Would I allow her to do that? At that point, I was newly married, working part-time, struggling to pay bills and stay in school. After what may have been the world's shortest silent prayer for guidance, I accepted her offer. For the next 2 academic years, your mother paid my tuition fees, including all the books. It was a marvelous provision from God. From that moment on, I concentrated on school, graduated, and left unencumbered by debt. Professor Rogers, it works. From Columbia, we went to a church in Pennsylvania to work with youth. While there, the church confirmed our call to missions, and we were sent to an unreached people group in Tanzania. We spent 11 years there and saw God break up the hard ground and bring new life. When we left, there were churches in 7 villages, and all the work was under national leadership. God led us back to the same church that had sent us out, where I've been senior pastor for the past 14 years. During this time, God has used our church to be a catalyst for sending missionary teams to Tanzania. I sometimes wonder what your mother saw when she looked at that young man in worn clothes and floppy shoes. Did she know that 5 unreached people groups would hear the gospel? Did she know that Christian literature would be in the hands of Swahili-speaking people? Did she know that a church in Pennsylvania would be pastored? She couldn't have known all these specifics. I didn't know them. But she saw something and obeyed her Lord. And her contribution to me and my wife is a participation in all that God has chosen to do through us. I share this with you, not to appear as if I am bragging, God forbid. First, to tell you what you already know, that you had wonderful parents. And second, I want to encourage you in your support of CIU. You cannot foresee all that God will do through the graduates of that school, but what you're seeing is leading you to be generous in the school's support. Keep up the good work. As you enable students, you participate in what God is doing through them. Thank you for continuing that, Cliff. See, Hebrews 11:20 says, he had confidence in what God was going to do in the future. This lady saw the future and saw that God wanted to use her to provide for a student here to go and participate in spreading the gospel. Hebrews 11:40, God had far better things in mind for us that would also benefit them, for they can't receive the prize at the end of the race until we finish the race. That tells me she did not do it for a reward. She did not live to read this letter that I've read you today. But now she knows. She knows the end. There are many more stories, and it's the privilege I've had over the years to hear those stories, and I would love to tell you about all of them. But as Hebrews 11:32 says, the writer of Hebrews understood my dilemma this morning. Well, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. But then he goes on in Hebrews 11. See, there's Betty Edwards in California who prays and gives. There's Miss Lucy Carpenter. The day before she went to be with the Lord, she called and said, I need somebody to come and pick up a check. I want to make one more gift to the scholarship fund before I go home to see the Lord. And our president went and picked up a check from her, and she died that night. Martha Cudums. She used to travel with her husband, who was in the medical profession, and she would stay in hotels. And Martha made it a practice to collect for the young ladies at CBC all of the shampoo and conditioner and lotion that you get at a hotel. And then she would show back up on campus with bags and say, Keith, can I take these to the dorm? I have something for the girls. And she provided them in those necessities. Martha's 90 plus now. She called me early December. She said, I want to send a gift. I said, Martha, we really appreciate it, but I know your situation very well. You have some real serious health issues now. You really can't afford to give to us, Martha. Now, believe me, I don't say that very often. But we've known this lady and her husband who's gone on to be with the Lord. We've known her for a long time, and I had to say to her, Martha, I don't think you can do it. And she said, Keith, I have to do it. Last night, God told me to. And the check was in the mail. Dean Graham called and said, I want to continue to help, and I don't have money, but here's my diamond ring. Take, sell it, use it. Martha Hoke, the Barbers. P.T. Chandapilla is a story in itself with the Barbers. The Webbs, the Walkers. It goes on and on and on. The list is long. It would take too long to recount the stories of those who have walked faithfully to provide. So today, what do we say? Donors, can you be the next cookie? Be the next burger? Be the next one that plans to give $1 million? See, please understand me today. One thing that's very important to understand in stewardship, it's not about the money. It's about the people. There is not a single donor that I've ever met with that their testimony is not what it has done for them to give the money, but what it has done to their spiritual life to connect with CIU and CIU students as they minister. It's about the people. Students, who among you would be the next Cliff Boone who take to the Swahilis because someone provided for you to be prepared? Are you ready? Are you the next one? I'm one of those that have a lot more days behind me than ahead of me. I'm quickly learning that. And yes, I'm ready to go should he call. But until he does, I pray for the day that CIU students all graduate debt-free, or as Cliff said, unencumbered by debt. Donors, would you help us? Let's help this generation go unencumbered so in a greater way than ever before they can take the gospel. How will it happen? I'm not sure. Because you see, as we share these stories, we didn't know about them until they happened. I often say to some of our folks, we work very hard to plan, but then God does the work, and it doesn't always match our plan. One of my favorite verses is Colossians 3:2. In him lie hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And that's what we count on.